if you ask many people why they smoke, a lot of them will say they smoke because they like smoking. Now, they believe they're telling you the truth. I don't want to give the impression that I think people are making up stories that aren't true. Many of them will believe what they're saying. Bottom line is, though, people don't smoke because they like smoking. Most people smoke because they don't like not smoking. It's not the same thing. Not smoking is drug withdrawal. When you get a person who's addicted to nicotine, they have to maintain certain levels. They have to be careful not to get too much in them. They have to be careful not to get too little in them. When a person doesn't have enough nicotine, they go into drug withdrawal. Now, a lot of people then, what happens is when they say they're smoking because they like smoking, whenever they're not smoking, they're in a drug withdrawal state, and smoking stops the state. I shouldn't say it stops the state, it kind of puts it on hold, because as soon as they put out that cigarette, usually in 15, 20 minutes, they're in withdrawal again. But at the moment that they're smoking, and for the time period immediately following smoking, they're not in drug withdrawal, and hence they say they like smoking. If they would quit smoking, they'll find out that they'll like life better because they're not going into withdrawal on a regular basis, but still, they feel that they do smoke because they like smoking. One thing I used to do when I would get people in smoking clinics who would use this line that they smoke because they like smoking, I would ask a question to the group. And the first question I would ask, and I talked about this in another video that I shot today about social smoking, but I'm going to repeat it here because there's a follow-up component I didn't get in that other video. But one question I would ask the group was, how many here, smoked, 2 packs a day or more? And I'd get, a third of the group usually about smoking 2 packs a day or more. This was going back a number of years. In the latter years of smoking clinics, there were fewer and fewer people smoking that quantity just because they just didn't have time to smoke that quantity. They were too limited on where they could get cigarettes and when they could get cigarettes. But back in the day when cigarettes were pretty freely available and people can smoke wherever they wanted to, it wasn't hard to find, regularly 2-pack-a-day smokers. Again, I would get people who were smoking 3 and 4 packs a day, occasionally 5 packs a day. But when I asked who would smoke 2 packs a day or more, I'd get a fair number of hands up. And then I would usually just pick out one of those people, and I would take a shot at this. It's if I'd ask them, did they like smoking, and most of the time, they would say, yeah, there's something they liked about smoking, or they would say they liked smoking. And if I got someone who was smoking 2 packs a day and liked smoking, I would ask them, well, which cigarettes, if you really had to think of the cigarettes that you like on a daily basis, really good cigarettes, your really great cigarettes, which cigarettes pop into your mind as really good or great cigarettes? And, they would think for a second, and they would say, well, the ones when I'd wake up in the morning, and, well, that makes sense because they hadn't smoked in 8 hours. That's when they're in the highest level of withdrawal, is when they first wake up. Unless they're waking up in the middle of the night to smoke, this was the longest time period people went without smoking. So that one made sense. But I wouldn't even go into that explanation yet. I would just let them say, okay, they like the one when they wake up in the morning. And they'd say they like the ones after meals. They'd come up with 3 cigarettes there. And then they'd come up with a few other occasional cigarettes they would smoke. And then all of a sudden there'd be this hesitation, because I would say, okay, well, which other ones are really good cigarettes? And you would all of a sudden see they were starting to, have a hard time coming up with really good cigarettes. And then after a while, because I didn't want to waste too much group time on this, I would, point out to them, well, we got a problem here. You smoke 40 cigarettes a day. They're smoking 3 packs a day. They're smoking 60 cigarettes a day. And they say they smoke because they like smoking. But then when I would press them on what were really good cigarettes that they liked, they couldn't come up with anywhere close to the number of cigarettes they were smoking. There were a whole bunch of cigarettes they smoked that they didn't know they were smoking. There were cigarettes that they smoked that they knew they hated as they were smoking, or they hated the side effects that they were getting, the social problems that were going with it, the dirty stares they may have been getting with it, or just physically feeling bad. And I would point out to them, the reason they say they smoke because they like it, but then they can't come up with, all these wonderful cigarettes, try to make it obvious to them they didn't like it as much as they thought they did. They weren't smoking because they wanted to. They were smoking because they had to. And I tried to make that very clear to them. They were smoking these rotten cigarettes. And then I made the point that it wasn't just that they were smoking, these few, good cigarettes. They had all these other rotten cigarettes going with it. But then, as part of the package deal, all the cigarettes, the good ones and the bad ones, they were all killing them, trying to get them to see cigarettes for what they were. But I got to point out, sometimes it backfired. When I'd ask somebody who was a heavy smoker, which cigarettes did they like, they would say all of them. And when I'd press them on it, they'd stick to the story. There's some people who actually smoked a lot and they loved every cigarette they smoked. And that kind of backfired what I was trying to do at that point in time. I was pointing out, though, come on, there's all these rotten cigarettes that you didn't like. Well, no, there's some people who loved every cigarette they smoked. Well, I had an important follow-up question for those people, too, though. I said, well, okay, you smoke a lot and you like them all. Well, how much do you like smoking? Do you like smoking more than something like, I don't know, something like, something like breathing? and usually that one kind of caught them off guard. And then I pointed out, well, if you like smoking more than breathing, well, smoking's a legitimate option. But if breathing really does seem important, and you point out, the things that require the heaviest breathing, that's going first. Any type of real vigorous physical activities, recreational kind of physical activities, but things that require a lot of breathing, that's going earliest. And then the things that start requiring, a little bit more, moderate breathing. And then eventually, oh my gosh, things that take, minor breathing. This is all what's going on the line to be able to continue smoking. When you get persons who are, crippled with emphysema, getting out of bed to their, going to the bathroom could take their energy out for, hours afterwards. Some people basically are crippled, the last few years of their life where they're almost able to do nothing. And this was all for, the love of these cigarettes that they were smoking. But again, when I pointed out, do you like smoking more than you like breathing? Very few people, would go as far as saying that. Now, are there people who may have said that? Probably, but not to me in a smoking clinic. Just the fact that they're in a smoking clinic was a pretty good sign that they were realizing they wanted out to some degree at this point. But for the vast majority of people, they're going to realize, breathing is just more important. But that's what goes on the line against being able to sustain, regular, long-term, heavy usage of tobacco. And that's the point that I kind of want to make in this video. Most people are, realizing it once they become heavy smokers, they're not enjoying smoking as much as they did early on. Sometimes they don't enjoy it all, but they still have to do it. And while they may flippantly say, they smoke because they like it, if they really analyze what's going on here, they're going to realize what they were doing. They weren't smoking because they liked smoking. They were smoking because they didn't like drug withdrawal that not smoking was inducing. The point I want to make, though, to everybody is not smoking, really not smoking, is not a state of chronic drug withdrawal. No, that's quitting smoking. Quitting smoking is, a 3-day period of peak withdrawal, which for some people is 1 day or 2 days. Some people it's 3, but then it gets better and better. And then pretty soon, you're not in withdrawal anymore. And that's really what not smoking will become, where you just don't smoke anymore. You're not in withdrawal all the time. You're not in withdrawal ever. Once you get off cigarettes, you don't face withdrawal again, unless you reintroduce nicotine again, at which point you start a whole, cycle of withdrawal. But to really break free of this and not to experience withdrawal, that is when you'll start to realize how much smoking you were doing because you felt you liked it, or how much of the smoking you were doing because you wanted to, compared to really how much smoking you were doing because you had to alleviate a drug withdrawal. That doesn't happen once you quit. Once you quit, you never have to deal with withdrawal again. As long as you keep your ammunition up of why you stopped, the benefits you've sustained by quitting smoking, and keep all those benefits and they keep free from cigarettes forever, it's still just as simple as sticking to a personal commitment to never take another puff